What do you get when a reality TV star, a Fox News host, and a wannabe dictator walk into the war room? Apparently, World War III.
We're living in a time where war is being planned in group chats, where deaths are being celebrated with emojis, and where drone strike videos are posted on social media like they're TikToks.
Meanwhile, some so-called leaders on our side of the border are doing everything they can to keep this sideshow in power. This week, we're doing something a little different. We're going back to a time when leadership meant sacrifice, not selfies.
Back to a moment in history when Canada showed up, not for oil, not for power, but for peace.
Because Canada gets underestimated, just like Ukraine. Remember when people laughed at Zelensky? Just a comedian, they said.
Well, that comedian stood his ground. He faced down a full-blown Russian invasion and united a country that refused to be broken.
In Canada, we've been doing that quietly for decades. We don't need to shout about it, we just show up. Canada may not have the biggest army, but we've got one of the most effective and respected in the world.
And we're not about empire. We don't drop bombs and call it democracy. We fight for peace, we fight with purpose, and we don't need to wave a flag every 5 seconds to prove it.
So today, we're taking you back to where that reputation was forged. One of the most important places Canadians have ever set foot, Juno Beach in Normandy, France. Now, you ever hear someone say Canada's military is a joke? That we're too nice, too small, too polite to matter on the world stage?
Yeah, we've heard it too. Usually from people who couldn't find Juno Beach on a map if you airdropped them into it.
You don't have to be standing on the shores of Normandy to feel its weight. But once you've been there, it stays with you.
It's one of the most powerful places we've ever visited. And for Canadians, Juno Beach should be a bucket list destination. Not just for history buffs, but for anyone who wants to understand what Canada is made of.
Juno was our landing zone on D-Day. And while the world tends to focus on Omaha or Utah Beach, it was the Canadian troops who advanced the furthest inland that day.
And they did it under brutal conditions, storming the beach under fire, clearing mines, taking heavy casualties in the first few minutes. No Hollywood dramatics, just grit and guts.
Now, we toured the Juno Beach Center, and I've got to say, it's one of the most honest and emotional museums that we have ever stepped into. In fact, once the final film ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the house.
They don't just tell you what happened, they show you who these soldiers were. Kids from across Canada, fishermen, farmers, teachers.
They weren't trained killers. They were Canadians who saw the world in danger and said, yeah, we'll go. 3 regiments of the 2nd Armored Brigade rolled in from Ontario, Manitoba, and Quebec.
By nightfall, they held the beachhead, fighting tooth and nail to push inland. It came at a cost though, nearly 1,000 Canadian casualties and 340 killed just on that day alone.
But here's the part that often gets overlooked. D-Day might never have succeeded without Dieppe.
2 years earlier, Canadian soldiers were sent into a disastrous raid on the French port of Dieppe. It was supposed to test German defenses, but it became a massacre.
Heavy fire, no real air support. Nearly 3,400 Canadians killed, wounded, or captured in one single day.
My own grandfather was there. He survived the landing, but was taken prisoner. He spent the rest of the war as a POW, and he carried the weight of that day for the rest of his life.
It was one of the most painful chapters in our military history. But those sacrifices, those brutal lessons, they saved lives in Normandy. So when people stand on those beaches today, they're not just standing on sand. They're standing on sacrifice, on survival, on generations who showed up when it mattered. Over 2,000 Canadians are buried in the cemetery near WWII.
The locals care for the graves like family because they know what these soldiers gave up for their freedom.
Canada didn't show up for glory, we showed up for peace. And the world hasn't forgotten, even if Hollywood has.
Even today, the people of Normandy remember. You'll see Canadian flags in windows, signs of thanks in cafes, and kids learning about what Canadians did for their freedom.
And let's be honest, it's frustrating that our role doesn't get talked about enough.
But that's kind of being Canadian, isn't it? We do the hard work, we don't get the parades, but we deserve to be remembered. Canada's not out here building empires. We're not looking for glory, and we're definitely not picking fights to flex our power.
Our military has always been about defense, peacekeeping, and stepping in when the world is falling apart.
One of the clearest examples? Rwanda, 1994, one of the darkest chapters in modern history, when the world looked away.
Almost 1 million people were slaughtered in 100 days. And in the middle of it all was Canadian Lieutenant General Roméo Dallaire, leading the UN peacekeeping mission.
And while most of the world pulled out, he stayed.
With barely any troops, no real weapons, and no political support, he did everything humanly possible to save lives.
You can read about it all in his book, Shake Hands with the Devil, The Failure of Humanity in Rwanda. And a famous quote from Dallaire sums it up perfectly. Are all humans human, or are some more human than others?
He saw that horror up close. He lived with the trauma, and he still said he'd do it again, because doing something is better than doing nothing.
That's Canadian leadership. That's strength. Not the loud kind, but the kind that stands its ground when no one else will.
So if anyone ever tries to tell you that Canada's military doesn't matter, tell them about Juno Beach, tell them about Rwanda, and tell them about Roméo Dallaire. And these aren't the only times that Canada has done the right thing. Well, America took the glory.
Let's rewind to 1979 Tehran. The U.S. Embassy is overrun during the Iranian Revolution. 52 Americans are taken hostage.
But 6 Americans escape, and guess who hides them? Not the CIA, Canada.
Canadian Ambassador Ken Taylor and the entire embassy team risked their lives to shelter those Americans for months.
Then, working with fake passports and a clever cover story, Canada helped sneak them out of Iran. It was called the Canadian Caper, and it worked.
So what does Hollywood do with that story? They give it to Ben Affleck. He directs Argo, a movie that turns the whole thing into a CIA operation.
So suddenly, the real heroes, the Canadians, are reduced to a footnote. The CIA becomes the star, and the whole world gets a solid feel-good lie.
Even Ken Taylor said it was an absolute work of fiction. But Hollywood, they gave themselves an Oscar.
Once again, the Americans turn Canadian bravery into American bravado, and the world claps.
But we remember the truth. And the truth is, when lives were on the line, Canada didn't hesitate. They sheltered, they protected, they rescued.
No press, no selfies, just courage and passports.
Normandy is what peace looks like after the world says never again. But today, we have leaders treating war like a live stream event.
People are dying, yet the people in charge are acting like it's all a game.
These are not serious people. They don't take human life seriously, and they can't even be bothered to plan properly. Instead, they joke around on a group chat on Signal and don't take responsibility for including a journalist on the chat. They deflect, defend, and deny as people die.
And then Trump himself posted drone footage of the explosion, and he wrote, and this is a direct quote, "These Houthis gathered for instructions on an attack. Oops, there will be no attack by these Houthis." Oops! That was his response to dozens of people being killed. I mean, enemy or not, life is life.
It doesn't matter where you stand politically. If you can't feel even a shred of empathy when a life is lost, you have no business leading anyone.
Trump isn't just backing military campaigns, he's already made it clear what he wants afterwards. In Gaza, he's made comments about rebuilding that land with his name on it. Real estate deals in a war zone.
He doesn't care about the tens of thousands of lives that have been lost. Instead, he's reposting videos showing giant golden statues of himself sipping coladas on the beach. What happened to empathy? What happened to humanity?
Empathy has become a liability. If you speak out about suffering, about children, civilians, refugees, politicians and right-wing media brand you as disloyal, dangerous, or even canceled.
We're not here to wave anyone's flag, but we are here to say you can care about people without picking a side. You can condemn cruelty without justifying violence.
And you should never apologize for being human.
And while all this chaos is unfolding, these men and women in charge are out here caring more about their stylists and their Botox treatments and golf tournaments than the actual fate of the world.
Former Fox News hosts and reality TV stars are making war decisions now. These are not generals, these are not diplomats. This is not normal, and it sure as hell isn't right.
Let that sit with you. A sitting president, mid-bombing campaign, mid-tariffs crisis, casually playing a 3-day golf tournament while people are dying.
And instead of talking about the crisis, he's bragging about his win.
These aren't serious people. They're Botox TV personalities and ex-Fox News influencers with launch codes who are more worried about likes and views than they are about human lives.
This is not an exaggeration. This is fact.
But Canada is not playing this game.
We didn't follow them into their illegal war in Iraq, and we won't follow them into their unhinged tariff war hell-bent on collapsing the world economy.
Because while they chase power, profit, and PR, Canada still believes in purpose. And when the world forgets how to feel, Canada remembers and shows up anyway.
When the world starts losing its mind, Canada still remembers how to be human.
We sent peacekeepers, doctors, engineers, and translators. People who didn't ask, what's in it for us? But instead, how can we help?
And sure, Canada's not perfect. We've made mistakes. But more often than not, when the world needs compassion with a backbone, Canada answers. So no, we're not the biggest, we're not the loudest, but in a world that's become obsessed with noise, maybe that's exactly what makes us powerful.
If you're tired of the war games, the performative politics, and the leaders who treat humanity like a hashtag, maybe it's time to look north.
Because Canada's not trying to take over the world. We're trying to keep it from falling apart. If this resonated with you, subscribe. Not for algorithms, not for ego, but because truth, history, and humanity deserve more airtime.
And if you have visited Juno Beach or any other Canadian war memorials, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you, and we read every comment.